member of the Gael Force Robotics Club and Engineering Academy, and received early admission into Stanford University. Just a quick disclaimer to everyone. XiLuo is not a Stanford admissions officer, so attending this meeting does not guarantee you a spot at Stanford. Let's continue. Our topics today will be the transition between middle school and high school, extracurricular activities, and the entry and application into university. Some topics that we'll be covering today are developed from your questions. So if you have any further questions, do not interrupt the speaker. Just enter the question through the chat box and we'll be sure to answer it to the best of our ability. If there are no further questions, let's start our topic. So XiLuo, there are three main questions for middle school to high school transition. So can you first, so the first question is, what is the main difference between middle school and high school?
Yeah, I think that like just a general difference between middle school and high school is that in high school, everything sort of matters more because you're thinking so much about college apps and what you could do to fill up your applications, both when you're listing out your activities and when you write your essays. So in middle school, grades don't really matter. The extracurriculars that you do don't really matter. But in high school, it's really about everything that you do really matters a lot more because everything you do from there on out are things that you're going to be putting on your application.
Just another question. What helped you transition between middle school and high school?
I think the thing that helped me transition from middle school to high school, there isn't really anything that you could do to transition it from middle school to high school. But I would say that freshman year is relatively similar to middle school where the classes aren't extremely hard. You don't really take any AP or honors classes. And I think the bigger transition is from freshman year into sophomore year, where you start taking AP classes, your workload increases a lot. And I think that the thing that you have to just do is just mentally prepare yourself and just be sure to balance your workload accordingly and not try to do too much at once.
So one of the questions we had from the audience was, what is one best thing you can do in 8th grade to prepare for high school? I mean, you answered this question a little bit earlier, but is there any specific tips?
I think in 8th grade, it's important to just kind of map out your next 4 years. There's like a list of activities on the Dublin High website of like all the clubs. Think about what you could do in terms of community service, all of the possible schedule and class offerings for each year is on the counseling website as well. What I did was I just made a spreadsheet and I just like mapped out every single year with every single subject and I just wrote out what class I'm going to take just so I have a general idea of what I'm going to do in high school. It's important though to be flexible. Like what you think now that you're going to do isn't going to be what you end up doing throughout high school. So just keep an open mind, I guess.
I think that's really helpful for everyone who had any middle school to high school transition questions. So let's move on to high school, actually. We have a lot of questions for high school, of course. So the first question, which I think is most important, is how do you take a leading role at school?
So in terms of taking a leading role, it's about being proactive and not really caring about like if other people will if the club will be successful, because with Dublin High, a lot of the times clubs are formed and they only get a few members, and it's important to just keep moving forward with that, because even if you're not running a big club, running a club is still important. As for like the bigger clubs, usually for those are clubs where you have to apply for leadership positions, where you have to run against other people. Again, it might seem like other people have more experience than you, or they're just more qualified than you in some way. But it's important to just apply for a lot of things, because just if you apply for a lot, you're bound to get some leadership positions.
Okay, another question is, which habits are most important for success, in your opinion?
In terms of academic success, I think that um, probably keeping a consistent schedule, knowing like when you are like making sure that you finish all your work by a certain time. I know that it's easy to kind of goof around or text your friends before you're done with homework, and I, while like having a good social life is important, I think that just being able to manage your time wisely is probably the most important thing to be successful.
What is your mindset towards success during high school?
My mindset. Um, that's a good question. I mm, I think I like to use like kind of the analogy like if you um don't do something if you like do something once you're gonna end up doing it again, so like with habits and all that. So like if you just get one B, then like the next B is gonna like hurt a little less, and the next B after that's gonna hurt even less. So it's important to just try to keep your grades high like at all times. um, a few B's here and there are fine, but just um, make sure that like you're not trying to find excuse, you don't like use the excuse having a few B's here or there is fine, because if you get into that mindset, then you're gonna be um, you're not gonna really have that same like level of, I guess, harshness that you would have on yourself if you aim for straight A's.
I think that's a really good mindset to have. So how many APs do you consider too many or too few? Because a lot of people ask this question.
Yeah, I think it depends from year to year. So obviously freshman year, I think the most that people could take is probably two, but usually like almost everyone takes no AP classes that year. Sophomore year, I think most people take around two: AP Euro and either AP Stats or AP Chem. Some people also take AP Language. I think only the Mandarin teacher allows you to take AP sophomore year. So sophomore year, usually people take two, sometimes three to four. Junior year, I think people usually take either four to five, um, or I guess three to five. And senior year, people take around the same as junior year, maybe a little less. So I think overall, like a good number to have is like around eight to 12.
Wait, what are some AP
Again, this
classes?
is yeah. Again, this is kind of like considering what extracurriculars you're doing, what other classes, like what can you personally handle.
So it really depends on the person, right?
Yeah.
So one question that we had from a parent was that, was your high school life packed with activities, or did you have a decent amount of free time? So a lot of people asked, like, how much free time would you have? How much time should I expect to have to do my own things? So is life in high school really just packed together, or do you actually have time to do things that you want to do?
Yeah, high school for sure has a lot of free time that you could do. I know a lot of people, they do pack their schedule of activities, but I don't think that's at all necessary. I think that it's good to have a lot, like a decent amount of free time, um, because like a lot of the times it's because they see what other people are doing and then they try to mock that, but other person might have better time management skills or some other skills that they might not have. And so if they try to mock their schedule, they're just gonna struggle a lot with it. Um, I think it's really important to address the like idea of burnouts, because those definitely do happen, especially during your junior year. Um, and it's important to know that just because you're fine with your schedule now doesn't mean that later down the line you won't burn out from it. Doing something consistently is pretty hard, and yeah, I think it's again, it depends on the person, but I think you should be able to have a decent amount of free time.
Okay. like going off your previous question, how frequently should you seek advice from the counselors?
Um, in terms of high school counselors, you don't really ask them too many questions outside of the times when you're required to meet with them. So when you set your schedule, that kind of thing, or like when they check in on you, um, again, like you can always email them. And I know that of course, not all counselors are the same. Some are better than others, but in general, from what I heard from my friends, they do reply decently quick.
So how did you choose your classes based on the counselors?
Um, yeah, I didn't really ask my counselors what I should take. Again, counselors, they will look at your schedule and see if it's kind of too many AP classes and like look at your previous grades to see if you can actually handle that. That's the only place where they really step in terms of picking classes. Other than that, I think I mostly pick classes from what I heard from upperclassmen um, and what I hear from the teachers. Because Dublin High, every year they have a preview day where you could go in and you could talk to the teacher, listen about what the class is, see what the expected coursework is, and that kind of thing.
So what time do you think is appropriate to actually focus on a single subject, like your major?
Um, can you explain that more?
So like if you plan to major in robotics or another field, when do you start like taking classes more specifically aimed at robotics or in the other field, in their field?
Yeah, I think that Dublin High, with the Biomed and Engineering Academy, it's pretty easy to go into biomed or engineering, especially with the clubs that they offer. Um, but I know with business and other, especially business, you could take go into DECA, you could take business classes, that kind of thing. Which those classes won't be available until uh, sophomore year as an elective. Um, Again, it's never too late to take a class. I think what colleges are looking for is less of what classes have you taken and more about like your own journey. So if you decide to change from biomed to some kind of engineering halfway through, you could still join the engineering club and talk about like why you make that change in your college apps, that kind of thing.
I think that's great advice. So on average, not to be like really stalkerish and creepy in any way, but how many hours should you get of sleep? How many hours of sleep should you get each night?
Yeah, so this varies from year to year. Freshman year, you don't really have that much homework to do. Um, Sophomore year is when you start sleeping pretty late, so you kind of average like around 11 p.m. to midnight. Depends on how proactive you are. There are some nights when you stay up until like 3 in the morning, but that's um, few and far in between. Um, but I think junior year and senior year, you're kind of averaging about like 6, 7, 8 hours of sleep. Again, it depends on the person. Some people like to just do their work like really late at night. Some people, they are the kind of people who start their homework right when school ends. Some people take advantage of Gale and lunch to do their homework. So it depends.
So you just mentioned how in the junior and senior year you get less sleep, right?
Hmm.
So that like pretty much goes to our next question on how did you manage your time in your junior or senior year being the most busy at that time?
Yeah, I think junior and senior year, um, you need to really look at the classes that you're taking and see if that's a good fit for you. Um, because you can't just be like looking at the amount of AP classes because sometimes honors classes have more work than AP classes. So you have to look at each class by itself. By then, you know like kind of what clubs you're most proactive in and the ones that you might want to join still. So you kind of have a better sense of your after school commitments. Um, And so you have to just be able to, again, balance after school commitments with your schoolwork. I know that a lot of people during junior year, they do a lot of homework during their Gale periods and at lunch, and they knock out a lot of their assignments then.
Okay, that's great. Does anyone have any further questions for XiLuo? If not, we're just gonna move on. So we had a few questions about extracurriculars. So one person asked, like, what extracurriculars did you actually take?
So in terms of extracurriculars, I mostly wanted to take ones that were like related to engineering. So I was a part of robotics. I did Boy Scouts for the first 2 years of high school. I was in a venture crew, which is kind of an extension of Boy Scouts. And then I went to a summer camp for engineering, and then I also did some kind of basic level of research with a SASU professor. So I didn't do that much, especially compared to my peers. But I think it's like a good handful of things that all have to do with engineering.
So you really just took whatever you think is important to you and what you were interested in, right?
Yeah, I think that for me personally, I didn't want to do anything that would seem kind of like a drag in high school. I know that a lot of times people do things for college apps, and I didn't want to necessarily do things that I would just regret doing because again, if I do those things, it's easier to burn out than let's just say like if I do robotics, because if I'm enjoying myself while I'm doing robotics, then um, I don't really experience a burnout with it.
So your main message here is that you should take extracurriculars, but make sure that you don't burn out or you're actually interested in those extracurriculars, right?
Yeah, I think that's really important for people. Just have like a central theme with their thing. If they enjoy a sport, then they should obviously pursue that sport. But also understand that those things take up a lot of time that you could be doing with taking classes, doing other extracurriculars, doing things that you probably like better.
Okay. So with the leadership question, what defines leadership in high school, really?
Um, I think in leadership in high school is really just what are you doing to be proactive? What are you doing to kind of set an example for other people to like what are you doing that you're managing other people, that you're not just focused on yourself? Um, I think that for me at least, um, I didn't do too much in terms of leadership, but from robotics and all that, the people who kind of have good leadership positions are the people who go beyond like just doing robotics. They do kind of the things that other people don't necessarily want to do in robotics, and they kind of invite, especially underclassmen, to do some activities, and so it's kind of inspiring and leading.
So how do you actually balance study and extracurriculars?
Um, Balancing studying and extracurriculars, it's it's pretty difficult to do, especially freshman year or like sophomore year. But you kind of just have to slowly adjust. So I know that like a lot of people freshman year they try out for sports, they join a bunch of clubs, but then by second semester freshman year, they leave most of those clubs, and they might like not do that sport again sophomore year. So I think freshman year is kind of a good year to kind of experiment with what you're comfortable with, what you want to do, especially since classes aren't that hard freshman year, so you don't have to worry about grades too much.
Okay, I think that's great advice. So for you getting into Stanford, a lot of people had questions on how you actually got into Stanford. So what do you think is the most important for to consider when you apply for college?
Um, I think colleges look at a variety of things, and it all depends on what kind of college you're applying to. Obviously, grades and um, the difficulty of your classes and your SAT scores matter. But when you're applying to top tier schools where everybody have extremely high grades and standardized test scores, the things that you really need to make sure are important are your essays or your extracurricular activities. Um, it's I think like when you get to a level where most people have the same grades that you do, it's important to spend a lot of time on your essays, especially.
So at the point you're getting to here is, are SATs really the top thing you should worry about? Is getting that perfect SAT score really that important?
Yeah, a lot of people are kind of like under the illusion that kind of like every point matters when you take the SAT or ACT, and that's not necessarily true. When you apply to schools, they kind of put SAT and ACT scores within a bracket. So like anything from like a 1570 to a 1600 would be viewed as pretty much the same. Um, even 1550 to 1600, they don't really look at like that particular. Of course, a lot of people are kind of they think that like every little thing about their application matters, and I guess if you have the resources or like the time to retake your test, then go ahead, you can. But again, when you're um, especially when you're studying for an SAT that's in the middle of the school year, you're balancing that on top of your schoolwork and your extracurriculars. So that might end up harming you in terms of some other thing that colleges look at.
You mentioned how essay writing was really important. So are there some ways that we can improve our essay writing?
Yeah, I think that college essays are something that you aren't really taught to write. They're more like narratives about your life. Um, for certain schools, um, for a lot of schools, they have similar essays, and so you could kind of copy and paste that same essay for those different schools and just change a couple things up. But for a lot of top tier schools, they have really specific um, prompts where you have to really dig deep to find I guess, a good response to it. And there isn't really anything that you could, I guess, prepare other than just um, be yourself. I guess it's kind of cliche, but um, they want to like when they read, they want to see a person. They don't want to just see like an essay that's like heavily edited, that people like that sounds like it. They took every word and put it into Doors and then spit it back out into another into their essay. I know that in mine, I really use humor and kind of long metaphors, kind of to convey my point, to make my essay more interesting to read. Again, admission officers are people reading your essay. They're not just a computer scanning for keywords. So you want to make sure that your essay it's clear, it's concise, it illustrates many points that you. So like, if you want your essay to say that like you're a good leader or like you care about your community, like an essay should cover multiple points, and it should be something that's interesting for you to read. Um, you could read it yourself many times and just not get bored of it, that kind of thing.
So should you really stress on the importance between the balance of achievements you made and the personal side of it?
Yeah, I think for essays especially, you shouldn't make them achievement based, but instead make them kind of some kind of goal based, and show that how your achievements were steps in achieving that one goal. I think that's a better way of writing essays. Again, um, you can write a good essay if it's achievement based, but in my experience, I tended to go for goal based essays.
I think that's great advice. I'm gonna move back into the SAT for our last question. So
Mhm.
Did you take any SAT prep classes, for example?
Yeah, I went to classes at C2 for the summer after my sophomore year, and I took classes there.
Okay. So how important really is my grade? Is it like top tier important?
I think grades are one of the more important things about your application. Um, I think it's important to like have that 4.0 unweighted while trying to go for as high of a weighted grade as you can. So that means um, maybe not taking an AP class if it means that you'll get an A instead of a B. Um, but again, I think that when you're applying to top tier schools where they're looking for just more than a grade, especially schools where they have, because you when you read their essay prompts, you can see like how important, how much they weigh the essay. I know for Stanford, their essay prompts were very unique, and there was a lot of questions that they asked, and so it was clear that they care a lot more about essays than maybe grades. Obviously, there's a certain threshold for grades that you need to go past, but um, I wouldn't stress out over like a couple B's.
So what were some of the prompts that you asked or you were required to write in essays?
Um, I know that Stanford has some very interesting ones. Uh, on the top of my head, they had one where it was like, you have an extra hour in a day, what would you do with that? They had another one where it was, if you could experience or like go back in time to experience anything in history, um, what, like where would you go? Like what time period would you go and what would you see? What 5 words best describe you? Name one thing you're looking forward to experiencing at Stanford. They have a really interesting essay where it's you're writing a letter to your future roommate, and so I think in that essay I really try to make it more personal, more I guess funny, to show like kind of that I have a personality, because I think a lot of the times that people based on just stereotypes from just I guess media, you see that like oh yeah Asians don't really have a personality, and I wanted to just kind of dispel that myth, show that I do have a personality, show that I'm not just, I don't know, my GPA.
So do you have a pool of prompts you choose from or do you have to answer every single one?
For the UCs, they have 8 prompts where you choose 4. For most other schools that use the Common App, you answer one really long Common App question along with the supplementals for those schools. And usually they're all the essays are required for Common App schools.
So one of the live questions we just got was that which is better, an A minus or an A in AP or an A plus in non-AP classes?
I think for me, an A minus and an A plus don't really make much of a difference. I think an A minus in the AP class is definitely better than an A plus in a non-AP class, especially when you consider how that they weigh the same in your GPA.
So another
Um,
question was that, are you satisfied with the school you got and the decision they made?
yeah, I'm pretty satisfied with my college applications, especially my essays and my decisions this year. Um, in terms of things that I like maybe regret when I was writing my essays was just getting involved in more things, doing more leadership positions, that kind of thing. But I think everybody has those kind of regrets when they do their when they write their essays and they fill out the application. It's completely normal to feel like maybe you didn't do enough during high school, or um, kind of regret on the things that you should have done.
So what you're saying is that you should just look forward and basically try your best instead of just looking at what you couldn't have done, right?
Yeah, I think it's hard to change the things that like it's hard to change the extracurriculars that you do once you get to like junior year. You could maybe join a club sophomore year, and they could you could pursue that throughout high school. But once you get to junior year, it's hard to join a club and kind of be really involved in it, especially when people in your grade have been involved in it for 2 years already. So like at that point, you should kind of just focus on your essays, kind of write just kind of a story about like, I guess, the kind of person that you are.
I think that's really important for all of us to learn. So another question that we had earlier was that what suggestions do you have for students to do earlier in high school in order to secure admissions into a good university?
Yeah, I think the only way to kind of guarantee admissions into a good university is if you have some kind of really good research idea and you're doing research um, at a university or at least at a really high level, or you have an internship at a large company. There's no way to really secure admissions into a good university, but there's obviously steps that you could take to stand out more. So kind of looking past things that you do at school and on school like activities and venture out into kind of summer camps that like at different universities, maybe um, programs that universities are having.
I think that's great. So one question we had was, is it mandatory to take the SAT subject tests, or is it just important to do so?
I know a lot of schools say that it's optional, but because everyone else is taking it, you kind of have to take it, especially for really high tier schools. If you're, and it also depends on what your major is, but um, most people take the Math 2 test, which covers everything up to pre-cal, and they also take either chem, bio, or physics for their science test. But
Um,
outside of those, a math and a science, people don't really take the subject test.
the last question we have for this section is that how much should I actually volunteer?
I think how much you volunteer is entirely up to you. Again, I would say you should do a lot of volunteering early on in high school because trying to do it during junior year or senior year when you're trying to write your applications or when you have really hard classes is pretty difficult. Um, I think in terms of volunteering, it's better to have some kind of consistency with volunteering rather than just doing a lot at once though. So like maybe um, pick a club or like some kind of outside volunteering organization and just sticking with them throughout all the 4 years to show that you actually care about the club or like that organization. And then maybe like freshman year, that's when you really go for like just random volunteering opportunities to kind of build up that time.
A question that someone just typed in the chat box is that, did you actually hire a college consultant to help with the college application, or do you even recommend one?
Um, when I went to C2, they like were willing to help with that kind of thing. So I didn't really hire one, but I did like chat with them and talk about some of the things that I could be doing, that kind of thing. It was like more of a casual conversation and it wasn't really anything that they like enforce or like try to push. Um, I think that having a college counselor, I think most people have one, but at the same time, the advice that they give isn't necessarily like the most helpful. A lot of the times, you're like I went against what people at C2 told me to do, just because again, like I didn't really want to do it. Um, but I think it depends on the person. If you're really proactive about things, then I don't even think you need an SAT prep course. I know like a lot of people just go on Khan Academy and they study by themselves and they do pretty well. But like again, having that kind of thing requires you to be proactive about it. Um, I know that I didn't really have because I didn't hire a college counselor. I didn't start my essays until I think late August, Whereas some of my friends who did have college counselors, they started it in, I think mid-June or like early June. So like maybe that's helpful if you don't really if you aren't really proactive about writing your essays or taking SAT classes.
So just a final thing, ranking the GPA, SATs, and college essays, what would you rank them in order of importance or in the time you should spend on it?
I think GPA isn't something that you really spend time on. Like, I guess extracurriculars and GPA you spend time on at the same time, but essays are like its own separate time period. Um, I say for me, the Stanford essays at least, it took me a month to write and revise all of it. For some people, it takes like 2 months. Um, I know for the UC essays, for the 4 prompts, it also took me a month. For just a Common App one, it took me 2 weeks. But the more essays that you write, the faster the next one takes. Just because you already thought about some of the things that you are going to write about. In terms of prioritizing it, I think in general, GPA is probably most important, and then extracurriculars, and then SAT scores are something that you kind of worry about during the summer. Some people start early with going to school year, but I think the summer is enough time to worry about it. One thing I will say with SAT and ACT classes is that, in my experience at least, it's less about the class itself. It's more about taking practice tests and just grading yourself and just taking a practice test every week or like maybe 2 every week just to have more practice with it, because I think that's more helpful than the classes themselves.
So your trick to taking the SAT is to just practice the style and the format of the SAT and ACT more, correct?
Yeah, because the questions that you don't know how to do are gonna you're gonna figure out what you don't know and what you do know only if you take tests.
I'm getting multiple people who are asking the question is that does an A minus, does an A in a non-AP class and a B in an AP class count differently towards GPA, or is it the exact same?
Um, so you have to see if you're talking about the unweighted GPA and the weighted. If you're talking about unweighted GPA, then every single class is weighted the same. So then that A would be better. But if you're talking about weighted GPA, then those two would be considered the same. Most colleges, they don't necessarily look at the weight of your class because each school weight classes differently. So like I know at some schools like honors pre-cal is weighted, but then at Dublin High, trig pre-cal, which is the equivalent, isn't weighted. So they look at the difficulty of your curriculum, and so that's where that B plus or like that B in the AP class is worth more than that A in that regular class. So I think to put it simply, I would rather get a B in an AP class than an A in a regular class.
We answered a lot of the audience's questions, so I think since there's no other questions, I think we answered you did pretty good job in answering the audience's questions. Now, I'm going to move on to some questions that are not super related to any other ones, but one of the big questions we had is how do you balance a social life with schoolwork?
I think maybe incorporate some of your social life with schoolwork. So like if you're doing some kind of homework or studying, maybe like call a friend, that kind of thing. Make sure that you're setting time, like maybe like once a week you go off with your friends for lunch. Kind of just like setting a time like specifically for your friends that you like are committed to every single week, regardless of your schoolwork. Because a lot of times people are like, oh yeah, I have a test today. Oh yeah, I have a test. And then somebody else, you have a test the next day. And if you just keep on finding excuses that has to do with school or extracurriculars, you're not really going to kind of keep in touch with them. But for sure, it's easier if your friends are in your classes or if they have the same extracurriculars as you.
When did you find out about your passion, career path, or your major?
Right. For me, because we do live in, I guess, relatively close to the Silicon Valley, um, it seemed like kind of the only career path for me. I'm still like not sure what I want to pursue in college. Um, I just know like a general engineering, but engineering is still like a really broad, I guess, a really broad major to talk about. Um, you don't really necessarily find out about your passion career path or major until you do something related to it. So maybe you think that you're interested in robotics, but then after you do robotics, you decide that you don't really like it that much, and then you might want to go into med. Um, it's kind of that kind of thing where you have to just dip your toe in different things until you find what you're interested in.
Kind of off topic, but what is your favorite book?
Uh, I don't really have a favorite book, but I guess the books that I read this year in AP Lit, they were all pretty interesting. Um, Especially like because you explore kind of more mature topics, and the books that you read are really books that you don't understand unless you read in a classroom setting.
Were you in any sports during your Dublin High School experience?
No, but I think that like in terms of sports, I know that with my friends who did do sports, the level of commitment is very different. I know that cross country kids, because cross country and long distance track are kind of hand in hand. Cross country is definitely like one that has a lot of commitment. Um, I don't like, but sports like tennis or swimming are ones with a lot lower commitment rates.
So, do you have any advice to deal with bad teachers who are unclear with instructions?
Um, yeah, there's not really much that you can do in terms of teachers who are unclear. Um, you could It's mostly just reading a textbook by yourself and just trying to learn it by yourself. You could ask a friend who's in a different class, like about different things. Um, but like you should know from the homework if you understand the topic or not. So I guess just keep on trying to learn the concept by yourself until you understand it.
Well, you mentioned how you should self-study. So, what are some good resources for self-studying in your opinion?
Um, I think self-studying is really just about testing yourself like incrementally to see if you actually know um, what you're doing. For me personally, I think asking friends if they have any questions about the topic is a way for you to see if you understand um, the topic, because if you get to teach someone else, then you're probably prepared. It depends on like for each class, but like a lot of the times it's just redoing homework or like reading a textbook, going over your notes, that kind of thing.
So, what was really the spark that made you love robotics and engineering?
Yeah, I think with robotics, it's just that it's not um, like when you think robotics is, you would think that it's just like building and coding, but it's grown to be a lot more than that. There's a lot of different like nuances with robotics, with like documentation, with things that just have uh, with things that doesn't necessarily have to do with robotics. So like a thing that robotics has at Dublin High is the design award, which also like qualifies you to like the next competition. And so with that, people like maybe have to design, I don't know, a simulation. Maybe they have to 3D model the robot. They have to do detailed sketches. So if you're like into art, you could still be in robotics. Um, you don't necessarily have to be like an engineering person to be in robotics.
A question we're getting in the chat box is that why did you pick Stanford as an early decision college? Or what do you think made you like Stanford, and what quality does Stanford value in you?
Mhm. Um, I juggled with a couple of like top schools, like dream schools over high school. I think like at first it was like I wanted to study abroad and because I wanted to kind of leave home. I've lived in Dublin for almost all my life and wanted to experience something new. But then like I thought about it and I wanted to just stay, like go to a pretty good tech school. So now I was thinking maybe Caltech. It's a decent distance from home, but then um, it's also like still in state and it's a really good tech school. But then like once my brother went to college, I realized that kind of staying local is it has like a lot of benefits, like staying close to home. And so then Stanford and Berkeley were the two schools that kind of are the biggest Bay Area schools essentially. And so I mean, um, the Stanford campus, the Stanford culture there, the professors, the research opportunities, how interdisciplinary the curriculum is, like all of that kind of attributed to me picking Stanford as an early choice.
So how do you think it's possible to improve your skills at writing essays or doing other things for applications?
Um, I don't really know how to like improve in essays other than just um, keep writing. Like your first draft of your essay it's never gonna be one that you submit. The first idea that you have for a college app probably isn't the one that you have. I know for like some of the Stanford prompts, it took me like 4 or 5 prompts. I mean 4 or 5 ideas before I got to an idea that I actually um, liked. Um, it's just a lot of rewriting and revisiting. Things aren't really going to work out the first try. Um, it's again like there's nothing that you can really do to improve your writing other than just to write.
So the more you actually do something, the more you learn and the more you improve, right? In your opinion?
Yeah. But obviously with college apps, it's not something that you could just always be writing about, but it's something that you could have on your mind. I know that the application essays sometimes change year to year, but they do change sometimes. I mean, they do say the same most of the time. So you could look at the essays now and just kind of think about what you have, like what they're asking for, and just kind of maybe like writing a couple of mock essays. Again, I know like it's kind of um, people don't really share the essays with their friends, but maybe finding like a close family friend that you're willing to share your essays with, just having them read it to everyone. I mean, have them read it and have them give you kind of a general feedback about like just how they felt when they read the essay. That could be helpful because they're again like you want your essays to sound kind of human and not just like robotic.
A question we're getting in the chat box is that what was actually your GPA?
Um, my unweighted GPA is a 4.0. My cumulative GPA is a 4.6. And then my 10 to 12 GPA is a 4.94. So I know that's on the higher end. Dublin High doesn't do ranks, but they do, if you ask them, certain counselors will tell you what percentile you're in. So, I mean, that could be helpful to gauge like how you compare to your peers in terms of GPA.
Another question from the chat box is that how important are summer camps in context for all college applications?
I think summer camps are more for, especially ones at universities, they're more for, I guess, a letter of rec and kind of what you learn from them that you could write on your essays. Um, Putting them, obviously, like the more prestigious ones, like putting them on your activities list is a really good thing to have. But kind of having, incorporating them into your essays and having a good letter of rec from maybe a professor there is a lot more important than just having it on the list. So it's more about like what you make of them than like which ones that you actually attend.
An off-topic question we had from another person in the chat box is that, did you apply for Harvard? And if so, why did you go to Stanford instead?
So what I did was I applied for Stanford early, which the decision came out in early, or I guess mid December. And most of the I mean, every other school except for UCs and CSUs were due on January 1st or later. So once I got into Stanford, I just committed right away because it was my dream school. So I didn't apply to any schools outside of Stanford, the UCs, and some CSUs.
So another question we got is that, did you win any national competition, for example?
No.
And what do you think made you stand out from other applicants for Stanford?
I think it was really my essays that made me stand out. I had like a coherent story. I kind of fit into some of the values that Stanford has. I kind of like wrote kind of just, it's gonna sound kind of cliche, but I kind of just wrote about who I am as a person with the values that I hold, and kind of explain about that sort of thing rather than just talk about, again, achievements.
So right now, does anyone have any last questions? Because our time is running a bit short and we're gonna start wrapping it up here. Okay, I see one last question is that, how many colleges did you apply in total? I think he already answered that. It was the UCs in Stanford, correct?
Yeah, and 2 CSUs.
So with that in mind, we're gonna wrap this up. I'd like to thank everyone once again for joining us today. Special thanks to our guest speaker, XiLuo. If you're interested in our club or the more speaker series events in the future, contact us through the resources listed below. We will post a recording of today's meeting on our website. Thank you everyone for joining and have a good evening. We are going to give an Amazon gift card to XiLuo for joining us today, and I'd like to thank everyone once again. Thank you for joining this meeting. Hope everyone has a great night. Good evening.
Thank you, XiLuo. You did really good job. Yeah, that's wonderful. I think
good claps on 3.
Yeah, we really appreciate you spend time with the club meeting today. And I think all information you provide gonna be to all coming next grader. Thank you so much. Thanks again. And our club prepare Amazon e-gift card for you. So it's our appreciation gift card. So please accept it and get something you really need. So we're gonna send the e-card to by text. You will receive it on your cell phone. Thanks again. Okay, thank you everybody. Good job, and you have a nice weekend and good night.